This is Eugene Chan and welcome to Straight Talk. Our guest tonight is Mr. Donald Choi Wang Hing. He is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the China Chem Group, one of the leading property developers in Hong Kong. Mr. Choi is also the President of the Hong Kong Institute of Architects, and he has over 30 years of management experience across property development. Tonight, we have invited Mr. Choi to tell us how he thinks the property market will fare under the new administration led by Mr. John Lee. Welcome, Donald.
Thank you for inviting me.
Right, Donald, we have had a mini-series on this show for the past 2 weeks on housing situation because this is quite a concern for Hong Kong people as well as the SAR administration. We had former Secretary for Development, Eric Ma. He talked about the red tapes issue, and we also had the former Director of Planning, Professor Ling Ka-kan, here to talk about on the execution side. So we have invited you here to complete the picture because you are a very experienced person, as I introduced you earlier, and you will be able to share with our viewers from a professional and from the private sector's perspective. So Hong Kong has topped one of the most expensive housing markets globally for 11 consecutive years. So as a property developer, they must be very happy. Is that right?
Well, I think, for developers, actually, we would like to see a stable and steady market. So it is not necessary that we look for the most expensive market to work in. What is good for the society will be good for developer as well as other businesses as well.
So if the market keeps on going up, the profit for the developer will increase as well. Is that true?
Not necessarily, because if you look at the land prices, government charge a high land premium. So if they foresee continued rise in the housing prices, actually the land cost actually will be more expensive. So it may not increase the profit margin. It may even actually provide the developer with more risk.
Right. As you know, in the community, people have different opinions. We often will listen. And one of a very common thing that we hear is that they said the property developers like to hoard on lands and units so that there'll be less supply, so housing will be less and less accessible to the ordinary citizens. Is that true?
I don't think that is a fair assessment. A lot of developers really would like to increase their supply to the market and put the housing as soon as possible to the buyers. That is how we actually recycle our capital. A lot of delay has been, as you have mentioned earlier with your previous guests, the planning process may take a very long time. The premium negotiation is very often being kind of a back and forth negotiations that not only take months but years to achieve. So all of this actually has become the bottleneck of development.
Right. Just now you said if the prices keep on going up, it may not be the best thing for the profit anyway. So if we have all the controls, what will be the perfect market for the business?
Well, I don't think there is ever a perfect market.
Right.
And it is not just a perfect market for the developer, but actually it should be a perfect market for the community and society. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we are very much like other Hong Kong citizens. We are looking for a steady kind of a market rather than, volatility that go up and down. And we do not actually prefer that type of market because that put a lot of risk on how we do development.
Right, Donald, as I said, even in the last two shows, all the past chief executives, or even with Mr. John Lee, housing is really on their agenda, like from all the election committee members. If you look at the last 25 years, we have put in different policies. I remembered when we first started to come to work, there was 90% mortgages. With the most recent policies, you can borrow up to only 40% depending on the price of the properties you buy. The stress test is quite difficult to pass because they increase a few percent, say interest rate goes up, and even if you rent the property, they might halve the income of the property. And also there's things called special stamp duty, buyer stamp duty, and even double stamp duty. So all that is trying to curb the demand, as we always listen to the government. Have all these measures been effective, in your opinion?
Well, obviously not. When we see prices keep on going up, and I think the problem with a lot of this administrative kind of arbitrary control of the market actually enable artificial market, and it is bad in a free market where we could not achieve a market equilibrium.
But could you say that if the government didn't do any of the policies, the market could have even shot up even higher?
Well, may not be. If you just look at the deposit and mortgage, I think if the government has less intervention, probably the first-time buyer could get on board easier rather than more difficult, because they need to actually suddenly double or triple their deposit, to buy a flat. How can you save that amount of money within a very short time? You can't.
Well, just one side question. If you look at the last few years, when Hong Kong was having the riot, the society isn't stable, the COVID situation for the last 2 years, but very fortunately, the property market has stayed relatively strong. Would you give credit to the government that we have such a low interest, like low borrowing ratio, and also like 60% of properties in Hong Kong actually have no mortgages?
Well, I think that is part of the beauty of a free market, where the customer will consider their capability and ability. They are not actually going to rush into the market recklessly. And Hong Kong does have a very robust demand. I think government has to recognize that it is the community aspiration to live better, to have better quality of life, and that starts with a quality home. Last
month there were a tender by 5 developers to a residential site in Tuen Mun, but the government has rejected the tender because it hasn't reached the reserve price. So in a way, someone said that the government is maintaining high prices. And is this part of the high premium land policy Hong Kong is adopting?
Well, Hong Kong government is the largest landowner. So if they really want to lower the price of housing, they can start with lowering the land cost, the land premium. So obviously, I think this is something that the new government can explore and ensure that they are not actually following a very old colonial policy of high land prices.
That being the case, I mean, as you know, Hong Kong has a lot of expenditure. The last few years we had spent a lot. We were in budget deficit on education, on the pandemic, helping this community and businesses. And a lot of the revenue comes from land sales. So do we have a solution? When you're saying that you're going to reduce the price of land, then where is the revenue coming in?
Well, I think we need to, diverse our revenue, government revenue. I think, don't be fooled that, land premium could make up a large part of the government kind of budget. Therefore, we are not paying. Actually, it is penalizing all the homeowners because they have to actually pay a much higher prices, and actually it's a kind of a tax already.
Right. Donald, you have been in the market for like over 30 years in the property development. Any suggestions on policies to the government that you think Mr. John Lee can consider? I'm sure he's watching.
Well, I think, first of all, in the future disposal of land, we should not just look at the kind of economic or financial bit. We should also look at what the developer will be providing in terms of building a better quality of housing, a better community. So, it's very much like the Singaporean URA tender. So we have 2 envelope system, looking at the financial bit as well as the design, the quality of the development as well.
Let's look at the real estate development cycle. We had former Secretary Eric Ma here, and we said that it used to be like 3 years, now it can be like 5 to 8 years, and he said that maybe the red tapes are sort of delaying the processes. Where Professor Ling Ka-kan, on the other side, said we need the red tapes to making sure check and balances are for all the stakeholders. So you mentioned the word bottleneck. So where is the bottleneck, do you think?
Well, I think by better governance, by actually working together as a team rather than as opposite kind of the game. I think it's a collaborative effort rather than the government considering the developer to be unscrupulous, doing business for to take advantage. I think we do no longer have that situations. For example, when we submit a building plans, the government is very much concerned about illegal use, converting the common area into private use. But under today's law and the DMC governing the development, that is almost impossible nowadays, unlike a few decades ago.
Would you attribute that to that blame culture that we talked about by Eric Ma and Professor Ling as well?
Yes.
The public servants are very worried.
Definitely. I think the community need to trust government more, need to trust different partners in the community, doing their business in an honest way more. That will actually go a long way in how we can work together, the public, the business sector, the government, working all together to build a better Hong Kong.
Right, so it seems that Eric Ma, Professor Ling, and you have the same opinion that more trust must be happening between all the parties, and let's move on.
Yes.
All right, we'll go for a break and see you soon. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We have been talking with Mr. Donald Choi about the effect of government policies on the property market. So Donald, we had a good chat on the first part, and we both feel that less blame culture should be adopted, and we can move on things with more trust. Things can work on much better. So Mr. John Lee on the manifesto had several measures, and he said he's going to develop the brownfield sites as well as the green belts. He's setting up two committees, one on the public housing and another one looking at land supply. And using innovative construction technologies. All very positive measures. I'm sure the community has accepted that with open arms. So will that shorten the actual real estate cycle? And do you think that how long would it take to solve a Hong Kong housing crisis?
Well, I think those are very good initiatives. Obviously, making use of technology, for example, MIC and BIM, to speed up the construction period. I think that is really already kind of proceeding already. Again, in the planning, in the approval process, the centralized kind of coordination task force that being set up can help, in a great way of coordinating between all the different departments and speed up the approval. So all of those are very good measures. Again, I really look forward to the new government to help to shorten the housing delivery program. And within hopefully 5 to 8 years, I would say that we can see drastic kind of improvement in the way that we deliver housing to the community.
So you still think that the housing shortage issue cannot be solved within this coming term? I mean, you will see some light in the tunnel. We will
start seeing results probably towards the end of the terms. Again, a development took years to plan and deliver. So we are unlikely that with the change of policy, we will immediately see results in the first 1 or 2 years. But I think we will see better delivery program, better quality of housing and development, better kind of catering for the needs of the community in our housing delivery, in the next 5 years or so.
Right, so it looks like the result-oriented approach is working, but it should take a few years before we actually see drastic results.
Yes.
And Mr. Johnny also suggested that he reintroduce private sector participation in the construction of public housing. Is that a good thing, and what effect has it got on the market?
Well, I think that definitely is a good initiative to use private sector resources to help with government public housing delivery. We have this program previously where contractors actually participate in the construction of public housing, and the government guaranteed to buy them back at a certain price. So I think it's really a good way of collaborating between the private sector and the government.
Yeah, another initiative is to engage the private landowners for the land development as well. See, all that seems to be very positive, but why weren't they used in the last few governments?
Well, you have to ask the government.
Right.
But again, I think we shouldn't look back. We should look into the future as to how we can do better. And I have a lot of expectation and hope for this present administration can actually create a better Hong Kong, more competitive Hong Kong, and actually create a solid foundation for Hong Kong to move forward.
So would you agree with the initiative like the Northern Metropolis and also Land Tower Tomorrow Vision? Do you think it's also the right direction in your opinion?
I think the increase of developable land definitely is a good way, and Northern Metropolis, the Land Tower, I think also we have a chance to actually create the 21st century kind of neighborhood. So from net zero sustainability, better quality of life, smart mobility, and so on, all of that can be planned and incorporated so that we have a future-proof neighborhood.
So I'm sure you're coming from also from the professional sector's point of view you just mentioned. So I'm sure the viewers by the television I was going to ask in their mind, with all the land coming, with all the supplies coming, would it translate to an inevitable drop in property prices? Because for most Hong Kong people, properties, or even in the major cities in the world, property investment is a major part of the asset.
Yes.
So would that happen?
Well, we must kind of believe in Hong Kong future. I think as we actually, yes, supply will have more kind of delivery, but also our living standard in terms of jobs, in terms of economic growth, will also increase as well. So we should not actually look at the future income stay at today level. We will have better income, we will have better opportunities, business opportunity. We will attract a lot of talents wanting to come to Hong Kong to make their life, to try their ideas, create their own business. We have a lot of startup, and all of this create a lot of demand.
So you think the market will still be able to sustain over longer term?
Yes.
We still a healthy growth?
It should be still a healthy growth. I think other people think, we can at one end have a depressed housing market while we continue to grow our economy. That is, not really rational. As the economy grows, the property market prices will increase and, go along in line with the GDP growth.
Well, I'm sure the viewers will be very pleased to hear your assessment, but we also read from the national news that our mainland now is adopting the policy that housing is for living and it's not for speculation. So do you think that will our property market in Hong Kong, we used to be one of, we are still the most expensive property market in the world, and a lot of people's assets come from the property market, years and years of savings. So will property still be a good investment? So I have to keep asking the same question.
Well, first of all, I think property is different from home, right? For a lot of Hong Kong citizens, they are investing in their home.
Right.
So it is not a commodity for sales and buying, frequently. But obviously, if we have a steady economic growth, the value of the property will increase. And, when you buy a flat in your 30s, 40s, and you retire in 60s, 70s, then obviously property has increased in value, and then you can cash in as part of a retirement plan.
Donald, we must also look into the short-term effect of, we talked about this in the last few shows, that there are people leaving Hong Kong at a rate much faster than before. We didn't see that a few years back. And also the expatriates are having, moving their bases to Singapore. We keep on hearing that. I'm sure, luckily it's not a majority, but there's quite a sizable proportion. Will those people come back?
Well, I think when they see Hong Kong continue to be a free kind of economy with rule of law, with a better quality of life and education for the children, I think they will consider the opportunities in Hong Kong and then if they decide to do so, they can come back.
Right, and I mean, I'm going to ask from all the prospective homeowners about the television right now, and they're going to ask you, we always have this golden rule of location, location, location. So where is that location now?
Well,
especially with all the development.
Well, that is why infrastructure is so important. When we talk about location, it is about convenience, about the job opportunities around your home. And with the infrastructure that Hong Kong now is investing, we have actually created a lot of multiple CBDs that actually have the job opportunities, a better kind of public green spaces, as well as the convenience of all the transportation. So I think when you look at location, depend on the nature of your job. If you are going back and forth into China, then probably you want to live in the northern metropolis. Right. If you are in financial, you will stay in central.
I have to ask you a question that you may find difficult to answer because you are with the property developer. We all know that the new flats are very nice, the kitchens are beautiful, they've got great common areas, but they're much smaller compared to the second-hand flats. And the usable space, especially when you have a growing family, you need to have a second-hand flat, and not everybody can keep on switching one flat to another, at least after 5 to 8 years. So should they be buying new flats or buying second-hand flats?
Well, really depend on your lifestyle. I think for a lot of the younger generations, they will use their flats for sleeping, mostly. Right. Their entertainment is outside, so they are looking maybe for a neighborhood or community that support their facility. If I am a retiree, probably I want to stay in my home more, and I want to.
One last question: with the U.S. interest rate hike going up, is that going to affect our property market?
It will, in the sense that if it go up, very fast, but Hong Kong need not to follow U.S. all the time.
Okay.
Right. And again, the interest rate, I think, is still at a very low level compared to historical inflation. Right,
Donald, a huge topic, but that's all the time we have. Thank you for sharing with the viewers the perspective from the private sector and the professional angle as well. So I hope this part 3 shows of talks on housing has given our viewers a more complete picture of the situation so that we can judge for ourselves how the property market will fare under the new administration. Have a good week and good night.